Day 809 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 484,000 military personnel losses, which comes as part of a truly staggering 1,740 additional Russian personnel losses in the past day. Then, as for hardware losses, a whopping 31 tanks and 42 APVs and 15 artillery. Then we'll head across to the map and start out in Ukraine, as the General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces reported ongoing battles for Vovchansk in the Kharkiv Oblast, as Ukrainian troops fight to repel Russia's attempts to seize the city. Previous Russian gains have prompted Ukraine to mount a defensive operation, deploying additional reserves to stabilize the frontline situation, as Ukrainian defenders are inflicting fire damage on the incursions, utilizing unmanned systems for reconnaissance and for precise strikes. We saw one such example of a Ukrainian FPV drone that attacked a Russian infantry assault group by the tree line somewhere in the disputed region. And in standard Russian army style, meat grinder tactics have been employed, with hundreds upon hundreds of Russian soldier losses in the process already, with reportedly up to 5 Russian battalions attempting to advance just on Vovchansk alone. Battles also raged in what's been referred to as a grey zone border settlement, or series of settlements, including Strelesha, Pilna, and Borisivka, with some reports at the moment identifying this red zone as something of a grey zone in the past day instead. President Zelensky described the situation in the Kharkiv Oblast as difficult, with Russian troops trying to gain a foothold in some villages amid the heavy fighting. Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrsky noted that the Russian breakthrough attempts have been halted, although the situation is rapidly changing in several sectors. British Foreign Secretary David Cameron also noted and warned of the extremely dangerous situation in Kharkiv, urging allies to bolster support for Ukraine, which somewhat reminds me of the ongoing dynamic of this war, where if Ukraine is achieving ground objectives, the West continues to support Ukraine, and if Russia is instead achieving ground objectives, then the West tends to then up its commitment levels to Ukraine. And we've seen this before with HIMARS, Storm Shadows, ATACMS, Patriot air defense systems, IRIS-T systems, you name it, F-16 soon, bilateral security agreements, NATO accession talks, EU accession talks, sanctions on Russia, more sanctions on Russia, and the redistribution of frozen Russian assets to fund Ukraine. Oh, and I should also pop in that laundry list. French President Macron also threatening to put French boots on the ground. Feels like a no-win scenario for the invading force. Then also for this region, a Ukrainian soldier shared a video showcasing some Kharkiv fortifications, revealing a network of trenches connecting concrete shelters. These ones are staged back a little bit from the actual country borders themselves, with some soldiers stating that they compared these positions favorably to those near Bakhmut, noting the contrastingly superior construction and fortifications of the defense lines, which Russian forces would inevitably find a bit difficult to breach these types of positions. And then also in the mix, and related to this situation here on the ground, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken acknowledged the cost of the months-long delay in approving the supplementary budget request and sending equipment to Ukraine during a recent interview yesterday. Despite the setbacks, Blinken expressed confidence in Ukraine's ability to hold the line in the east, as Russian troops launched a new offensive targeting Kharkiv back on May 10th. He also stated that he believes Ukraine can maintain its advantage in the Black Sea and hold Russian forces at risk, including in Crimea. Oh, and quick last mention for this region, as you might guess, the Russian Volunteer Corps, who are the anti-Kremlin Russian units, backed by Ukraine, are actively involved in the defense of Vovchansk and the Kharkiv border area. For instance, here we see a BTR-82, which is firing at Russian units near the Vovchansk meat processing plant. And there is no innuendo there, it just happens to actually be a meat processing plant. Then looking around on the map, because somewhere in the east we saw the effective destruction of a Russian tank with a well above average sized ammunition cook-off. Then another destroyed tank by a Ukrainian FPV munition. Then we saw a Russian ammunition depot which was struck in occupied Luhansk just this morning. Then in the north, and in fact outside of Ukraine, so moving back to just beyond the borders of Kharkiv, as a Ukrainian FPV drone flew into a Russian checkpoint next to Oktyabrski in the Belgorod Oblast and destroyed a Russian VPC Ural MRAP. And you don't see many of these, or in fact any of these, generally at all inside of Ukraine, simply because there's just not that many of them. So instead they stay inside of safer Russian grounds. Well, not that much safer today. And just a note for this checkpoint, it's next to a gas station, which is around 13 kilometers or about 8 miles from the Ukrainian border. Now, there is in fact a much more official checkpoint or border entry point, obviously for civilian use in years gone past. But of course, these days, with all of these military actions, things need to be pushed right back. Then headed across to some news for today. So South Korea's National Intelligence Service, or the NIS, is investigating suspicions that North Korea has supplied Russia with artillery shells and other weapons manufactured in the 1970s. The investigation comes after the South Korean media reports claimed that 122mm artillery shells made in North Korea in the 1970s were used on Ukraine's Eastern Front. Both Ukrainian and US officials have previously confirmed Russia's use of North Korean-produced weaponry in attacks on Ukraine. And as of now, the NIS is analysing the situation in detail and tracking the overall military cooperation between North Korea and Russia. And as Russia's military stocks dwindle and domestic production is hindered by Western sanctions, North Korea has emerged as a potential key weapons supplier. Russia, of course, was also believed to be purchasing missiles from North Korea for use in Ukraine, but that may have turned out to be a short-term exercise due to quality issues and seemingly limited availabilities to supply Russia with so far. Then for some big news for the day. So in a surprising move, Mr. Vladimir Putin reportedly dismissed Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, nominating Andrei Belousov as his replacement. Now, Shoigu, a longtime close ally of Putin, has led the Russian Ministry of Defense for over 11 years. And despite facing criticism from pro-war hawks for mishandling the war effort in Ukraine, Shoigu was appointed as the secretary of Russia's Security Council, replacing Nikolai Patrushev, who in fact held the position since 2008. And so as for this Minister of Defense shakeup, Belousov, a relatively unknown figure, is otherwise known for supporting increased military spending and mobilizing Russia's economy for the war effort in Ukraine. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov also stated that Belousov's task is to integrate the military-industrial complex into the country's economy. As such, my crystal ball tells me we're probably going to see a lot more Russian factories go under, and of course, go up in flames, after the new defense minister tries to strong-arm those companies into cutting profits and going into debt to support the Russian war machine. Now, it should also be mentioned that Belousov's background includes serving as Russia's economy minister and former deputy prime minister, which just goes to show that Putin continues to install figures that he can trust, as opposed to those that actually have any experience in the role. Not exactly a meritocracy over there. Which is also no different to Shoigu himself, who also never had a military background to speak of. So in the end, this move of a defense minister switch-up likely has the new puppet serving as a nominal figure without any real decision-making power. So possibly another yes man, which will still be inherently less experienced than Shoigu, who just finished his almost 12-year tenure in the role. But of course, I'm sure you might wonder, in this game of musical chairs, will Shoigu ever get ousted and have to decide between a window or a cup of tea? Well, possibly, but I still maintain that Putin needs Shoigu alive for now, just in case things go south and Putin finds himself at The Hague, the International Criminal Court, at which point he would definitely attempt to make Shoigu his fall guy. But it wouldn't work at all. although Putin likely doesn't realize that, living in his little bubble of ignorance. Then to some economy news for Russia. So Russia's struggling energy giant Gazprom faces increased taxation this year, despite record losses. The company's revenue fell by 30% last year, with a net loss of $6.9 billion, the largest in 25 years, due to the worsening relations with Europe following Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Now, Gazprom, heavily reliant on European markets, struggled to find alternatives after the EU moved away from Russian gas. And so, while finding some success in other foreign markets, this only accounts for about 5 to 10% of its European sales. Not to mention they don't really have the delivery mechanism for it either. And already, Moscow has heavily taxed Gazprom's revenue over the last 2 years, with the company paying $28 billion to the government in 2023, accounting for about 10% of the government's entire revenue. And so the decision to further increase taxation has forced Gazprom to cut investments by 15% this year, with profits expected to be restricted until 2030. And when speaking about this, Gazprom's head said that gas production dropped 25% in September of 2023, blaming, quote, politically motivated decisions by countries refusing to import Russian gas. And, well, on that front, Russia had its own politically motivated decisions to invade another country, causing this problem in the first place. But of course, even for Russia and Putin, taking on powerful oligarchs, owners, directors, CEOs, etc. of companies is not an easy feat, unless of course they are all hit with a wave of super coincidental, mysterious deaths, in an effort to force these large companies into compliance with any Russian narratives or goals, thus driving their economic models into the ground, along with Russia in the process as well. And then in some other news, and speaking of Russian oligarchs, Italy has reportedly spent 32 million euros over the past 2 years maintaining and servicing the seized yachts of Russian oligarchs. The Italian Ministry of Finance has been shouldering the burden of all expenses, including mooring fees, for the 7 vessels in their custody. Just 7. So this expenditure highlights the ongoing financial impact of sanctions imposed on wealthy Russians in response to the conflict in Ukraine. The seized yachts, once symbols of opulence and power, now sit idle in Italian ports, with their upkeep draining state coffers. And so, as you can imagine, many online citizens, or netizens, have added their own 2 cents onto the matter, with some calling for selling these yachts, while others say strip them, then sink them. I like that one. And even a rare few recommended converting them into drones and sending them back to their country of origin, if you know what I mean. But either way, it's high time some of these Russian assets abroad get sold, then putting that money to good use. And sooner or later, some legislation will come along to allow for that. Then headed across to a quick rapid-fire Russian military mobilization blunder segment, as there are multiple recent stories with a single common theme. As Russia is still experiencing a lot of draft dodgers, or the to-be-drafted population, deserting. Some have escaped to Thailand or Bali, and reportedly a rare few even went to the States, specifically at Alaska's St. Lawrence Island. Population 1,500. So that's a bit weird when someone shows up to the island with a thick foreign Russian accent. And in some other related news, even some Russian Z channel social media posters are also having been called up. So now they have to live up to all of that dirt they espoused in support of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Let's see how that goes. Then as for a little bit more of this military mobilization blunder news, we've also seen the case where the Russian army beatings continue until the morale improves. And this poor guy was just guilty of drinking vodka and thus getting re-educated, quote unquote, for alcohol abuse. Which is like forcing a Russian to go against their very nature. You can't just rip the spots off a leopard. Then headed across to something a little bit lighter for a moment, as the stunning natural beauty shown for this recent occasion of the Northern Lights, with the photos taken in the Donetsk region near Kramatorsk. Then headed across to a quick funny to round it all off for today, guys. And I wouldn't normally put this in the funny section, but the Russian-based author seemed to be having a bit of a laugh, so here we go. as he noticed playground swings and equipment in Chelyabinsk of Russia, where they were all literally just all chained up. It's like living in some sort of dystopian society. But when you're living more and more in an economically destroyed society, compounded by a partial thief mindset for a nation, who seem to love their white goods, then I guess this is all you can really expect. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like and comment. Thanks for everything, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!